Hi, I'm Daniel Licious.
And this is Mick, the Doctor of Digital.
Welcome to Music 101. Music 101 is created to empower music itself and legendary icon in the music industry. And another week, another great episode on Music 101. So, Mr. Mick, what will be our great topic for today?
Well, this is From Bayou to Ballad, the timeless story of Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Interesting. Should we give them applause or drum roll? Which one do you like?
Well, maybe a drum roll sounds good. They deserve
Let's
it.
do the drum rolls. So, how should you introduce this revival?
Oh, yes. Actually, I heard a preacher's sermon during the past week, and his point he made kind of stuck with me because he said the band had ungodly lyrics that he didn't specify exactly which ones, but some of his kids said that's what they objected to. So I think, here's kind of an interesting band to consider. The preacher and I are exactly the same age, and we share a musical and cultural heritage. So I thought, let's take a look at these guys. And my personal perspective on the chief songwriter, John Fogerty, was that he wrote some of the most moral and best lyrics of the era. That was one of the best features of the band. And at the time, I listened to them incessantly, and I had all of their albums. So I want to thank Mom and Dad for helping me out there. So I began to reflect on CCNR, Creedence Clearwater Revival, as one of my favorite bands before being blown away by seeing Ian Hunter and Mata Hoople live in 1973. CCNR are unquestionably one of the greatest American rock bands ever, for they are the quintessential rock band with roots edge to them. And for research, I started to look at, and there's a really great series of articles by You Discover, and they were very helpful. The band was often mistaken for being a Southern Bayou band, hence the title that's Bayou Band, but they're actually best viewed as part of the late 1960s San Francisco sound because that's where they were actually from. And that sound refers to rock music performed live and recorded by San Francisco based rock groups of the mid 1960s to early 1970s. It was associated with the countercultural community in San Francisco, particularly the Haight Ashbury district during these years. San Francisco is a westward looking port city. A city at the time was big enough, but not manic like New York City or spread out like Los Angeles. Hence, it actually could support a scene. In conclusion, according to journalist Ed Bellamy, a core of Haight Ashbury bands played with each other for each other.
So, Mr. Mick, how should they be remembered?
They'll probably best be remembered for their unique Bayou sound popularized in songs like Proud Mary and Green River. They also created a string of strong albums that remind us that great classic rock albums consist of first rate LPs that are all about hook filled songs that hit the charts and clever covers artistically produced. If you want to start your journey with CCNR with just one album, then check out Cosmo's Factory. It has some great singles. Every track is a winner, and it includes their amazing take on Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine. That's a song that was written by Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong for Motown Records in 1966. It has one of the most interesting recording histories of any pop song. The first recording of the song was released by Whitfield for Gladys Knight and the Pips, released as a single in September 1967. It straight went to number one on the Billboard R&B singles chart and number two on the Billboard Pop Singles chart. Shortly became the biggest selling Motown single up to that time. The Marvin Gaye version was released in the beginning of 67, overtaking the Gladys Knight and the Pips version as the biggest hit single on the Motown family of labels up to that point. The Gaye recording has become an acclaimed and soul classic. In 1998, the song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame for historical, artistic, and significant value. In 2004, it was placed 80th on the Rolling Stone list of the 500 greatest songs of all time, then re-ranked at 81 in 2010. In 2021, it was ranked 119. On the commemorative 40th anniversary of the Billboard Hot 100 issue of Billboard magazine in June 2008, Marvin Gaye's Grapevine was ranked 65th. In addition to be released several times by Motown artists, the song was recorded by a range of musicians, including Creedence Clearwater Revival, who made an 11-minute interpretation for their 1970 album Cosmo's Factory. The band had initially started to play the song live before rearranging it in the studio with a long jam-like instrumental part for their record. Unusually for such a long song, radio stations began to play the song. Eventually, it was released as a single against the band's wishes, but that release reached number 43 on Billboard's chart with more modest success in other countries, but it did reach number 10 in the Netherlands. In conclusion, with CCNR, the song was one of the few to become a hit in 3 separate times for a trio of artists.
So they are the equivalent of the Beatles at that time.
Yeah, it's the Beatles were sort of breaking up at that time, so people were looking
Oh.
around for some alternatives, and that's 69, 70.
So, Mr. Mick, how did this band get started as a band?
Yeah, it's an interesting background. Although their music evoked the raw bayou and gospel tinged sound of the rural South, Doug Clifford, Stu Cook, and Tom and John Fogerty actually hailed from El Cerrito, California, a small town near Berkeley. Back in 1960, while in junior high school, the boys formed bands and spent much of their time practicing in the Fogerty's garage. Tom and his younger brother, John, had separate groups. Tom's band, Spiderweb, and the Insects, I'm not making that name up, which featured Jeremy Levine of the Seeds, also a big pop hit at the time, signed a recording contract with Delphi Records, but they broke up in 1959 before releasing any records. The Blue Velvets, a group led by John, began backing Tom. Eventually, Tom joined the band, and the group recorded 3 singles with Tom on lead vocals for Orchestra Records in 1961 and 62. By the mid-60s, the group had been renamed the Gollywogs and were recording with Fantasy Records, with Tom and John sharing lead vocal duties. They first recorded in 1964 as the Gollywogs. Tom Fogerty worked as a packing clerk in San Francisco for Fantasy Records, which was actually a jazz label. Fantasy released Don't Tell Me No Lies, sung by Tom in late 64, but neither it nor the 65 follow-up singles Where You Been and You Can't Be True were played on the radio outside of their local area. They were just another Babe area bar band until Brown Eyed Girl sold 10,000 copies in California and adjoining states. It looked likely that they would stay that way because now both John Fogerty and Doug Clifford were drafted into the Army. Remember, this is a time of Vietnam. So 1967, the band again renamed, this time to Creedence Clearwater Revival. John had become a full-time lead singer and primary songwriter. During the few years of life of the CCNR, Tom sang backing vocals and wrote songs, but only one of his songs from when CCR was named the Gollywogs, Walking on the Water, was re-recorded, chosen to be put on a CCNR's debut album. And this is kind of the animosity that created early on. Tom is the older brother, John is the younger, but John really took more of a lead throughout the length of the band. In 1967, John finished his stint with the Army, and the band picked up right where they had left off. Now they are Creedence Clearwater Revival, and there's competing stories how it happened. It may have been the name of one of Tom's friends, or it could have come from a beer commercial. Out of the West comes Creedence Clearwater Revival, a San Francisco band with a crunching R&B sound, a haunting way with blues, and sturdy rock repertoire. That's actually how Billboard magazine announced the band's debut album in late June 1968. 2 weeks later, it was released, and not long after, that self-titled album made its debut on the U.S. album chart. It climbed to number 52, propelled by the single Susie Q, which made its own journey to number 11 on the singles chart. And this was a cover of the Dale Hawkins original Susie Q. A cover of Screamin' Jay Hawkins' I Put a Spell on You followed their first single. That was a song that we played on our Hollywood episode, and both cover versions were on the band's first album, which reached number 52 on the Billboard chart. In 68, May, they played their Avalon Ballroom debut on a bill with Taj Mahal. 2 months later, they played the Fillmore West, famous venue in San Francisco, with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. In conclusion, with Susie Q on the Billboard chart, they played the Fillmore West 3 more times on bills with Fleetwood Mac and Jethro Tull, and they were on their way.
They deserve to have an applause, Mr. Mick Credence. Clearwater, thank you so much for sharing your voices to the world. So, how did Bayou Country put them on the map?
Well, with limited but encouraging success, CCNR began work on their follow up, Bayou Country, at RCA's Hollywood Recording Studio in October 1968. The album was completed before year's end and hit stores on January 1969. Ahead of the album's release, Fantasy Records put out the single Proud Mary, backed by Born on the Bayou. And can you imagine a great song, if you've heard it, Born on the Bayou, being the B side? That's what happened. By the end of the month, the double sided single had crashed into the Billboard singles chart when it peaked at number 2 for 3 weeks in March. It was kept from the top by Tommy Roe's Dizzy. Now, I have nothing to do with it, but at one visit to Disneyland, my uncle and I actually saw Tommy Roe live at Disneyland. Despite their success with a number 2 hit, Creedence songs set a pattern for the band. Despite consistent top 10 hits, Creedence never had a number 1 hit single on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. With the release of their second album in January 69, Bayou Country, it became evident that Creedence had an uncanny knack for writing hits. Born on the Bayou was written by both John and Tom, but 3 other hits were written by just John, with him taking chief songwriting duties from then on. Their astounding string of successes continued from their first album with Born on the Bayou, Bad Moon Rising, Proud Mary, and Lodi. And all these now hits, one right after the other. A week after Proud Mary hit the stores, Bayou Country is officially released, and by the momentum generated by the single, Bayou began its steady climb on the album charts. By early April, it made the top 10, peaking at number 7 in May. Coincidentally, same week that Bad Moon Rising entered the singles chart. It's the group's first song to hit the milestone of Spotify's Billions Club and marks another impressive achievement for the band. 55 years after its original release, the song entered the club when they tally more than 1 billion streams on the platform. It was finally released as a lead single off Creedence Clearwater Revival's third album, Green River. The track peaked at, again, number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart June 69 and reached number 1 in the UK in September of the same year. The story goes that Fogerty wrote the song after watching the 1941 film The Devil and Daniel Webster, in which a hurricane destroys the crops of all local farmers except for the main character, who had made a deal with the devil. Now, maybe the preacher had something to this. Maybe some off-the-wall lyrics are in there. The imagery of that scene inspired the song's apocalyptic lyrics, which Fogerty says he didn't realize was at odds with the song's upbeat melody until the band started recording. In 1993, he told Rolling Stone, "Here you've got this song with all these hurricanes and blowing and raging ruin and all that, but it's," snaps his fingers at that time, "I see a bad moon rising. It's a happy sounding tune, right?" It didn't bother me at the time. Another interesting slant on the song is about the lyrics. In 2013, Spotify conducted a poll to determine the most misheard song lyrics, and the song's chorus, "There's a bad moon on the rise," ranked at number 5, often heard as "There's a bathroom on the right." Sometimes Fogerty changes it just for fun, sharing in the wonderful tradition of rock and roll. People misconstrue the lyrics, and that's what they thought I was singing. And when I hear the song on the radio now, I can see why they thought that. It does sound like it could be what I'm singing. So I do it for fun. I'm not one of those people that walks around, "I'm a serious artist. I like to have fun." In conclusion, Fogerty was a multi-dimensional songwriter.
Certainly. So when did the river cross the pond?
Well, I think,
Or I
yeah,
think yes. Go ahead, Mr.
yeah,
McCray.
we should talk about Woodstock. I think that's what you
Yes.
meant, right? By the time they got to Woodstock, of course, lyrics from a famous song about Woodstock, because by the time CCNR took the stage at Woodstock, they were just about the most popular band in America on the strength of Proud Mary and Bad Moon Rising. During their hour-long set at the festival, they played both songs along with Bootleg and Keep on Chugglin' from Bayou Country, and in keeping with the status as the album opener, they began their set with Born on the Bayou. And of course, I always need to mention something about Woodstock. because I'm writing about Woodstock and especially the incomparable lighting director and stage announcer, as it happened at Woodstock, Chip Monk. So Woodstock is really important. I'll let John Fogerty have the last word. He said, by the time we got to Woodstock, I felt we were the number one band. And assuming that the Beatles were God, I thought we were the next thing under them. He was not wrong. They were really popular at that time. But they were one of the few bands at Woodstock that have a significant success on the Billboard charts. Yet many people today probably don't even know that they actually appeared on the bill because they did not feature either in the movie or on the album. Their hour-long set was like a greatest hits album, with Bad Moon Rising and Proud Mary reaching number 2 on the Billboard charts. So we know about it, but after the fact, and there have been now some limited releases of their actual performance at Woodstock. In conclusion, as they walked on stage just after midnight on the Saturday, their current record, Green River, was at number 15, its third week on the American chart, and it would be their third single to stall at number 2.
At number 2, so this is the question. When did the river cross the pond?
Yeah, so already an American chart topper for a month, the previous autumn, the LP Green River crossed the pond and made the UK a British bestsellers list on January of 1970. On the strength of their single Bad Moon Rising, it was really a setup for the band's third album, Green River, which would be released 2 weeks out before the band performed at the Woodstock Festival. Born on the Bayou with its swamp-like feel as the opening cut on the album, and establishes the mood for the whole first side of the long player. Bootleg and Graveyard Train both carry on that vibe of the voodoo, New Orleans mysticism, and an altogether different America from the cities in the north and on the California coast. Not everyone fully appreciated the power and potential of these songs, and critics were less than effusive. Even Rolling Stone wrote, "The good cuts are very good, but the bad ones just don't make it." Of course, they would have been right if there was a bad cut. The album is a standout regardless of what the music critics think, and the fans thought well of it. Before the band went in to record Bayou Country, John Fogerty had already written many of the songs, including Proud Mary, and he didn't have a title for it. He said, "I go back to the song title book, and Proud Mary is sitting there, and dang if it didn't sound like a paddle wheel going around." I said, "Man, that sounds like a riverboat." Now that's the magic, the myth, and the voodoo of this whole deal. I began to write the song, the story of that boat, Proud Mary. It was the central character. That's exactly how it happened. It's no more mythical than that. Strangely, perhaps, Proud Mary is placed as 6 of the 7 tracks on the album. Conventional wisdom would say that's not the ideal place to put your strongest song, yet it works. Side 2 opens up with a cover of Little Richard's Good Golly Miss Molly, but it really isn't a cover at all. It's a total reworking of the classic rock and roller that gets the full CC&R treatment. The band performed on the Ed Sullivan Show and played that tune in March of '69. And of course, that was a huge introduction to the mainstream American audience. The blues of Penthouse Pauper precede Proud Mary. It's another excellent song that has some searing lead guitar work from John Fogerty against the solid rhythm section of Doug Clifford's drum and Stu Cook's bass, serving as a hallmark of the band and that album. Keep on Chugolin rounds the whole thing off with its canned heat like Boogie, another great band and one of my favorites at the time. But it has a quintessential Fogerty lead vocal that propels the track along, accompanied by his insistent guitar. It's a perfect closer for what is an impeccable album, but one that has much less attention than it deserves compared to the band's more successful albums. It took longer than they would have wanted, but they got there eventually. By the end of '69, Creedence Clearwater Revival had 3 UK singles chart entries from a wealth of US hits, and had recently gone number 1 in UK with their biggest hit ever in the British 45, Bad Moon Rising. They'd been an albums band in the US for 18 months by the turn of the decade, but the LP market in Britain remained mysteriously closed to them. Then, finally, in January 1970, a breakthrough, Green River, already American chart topper, finally showed up on the UK bestsellers list. So it should, since this third studio album was one containing Bad Moon Rising, as well as its flip side as a single Lodi, which had enough traction to make number 52 in its own right in the States, and Green River itself. Another gem from the John Fogerty songbook. This one went all the way to number 2, The US later made it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In the UK, made a respectable 19. By 1970, CCNR had undeniably became the most number one American rock and roll attraction. The man responsible for their exalted position was John Fogerty. In addition to writing the band's material and producing their records, this was his soulful voice, the archetypical rock vocalist. Put him into almost any great rock band of the 60s and 70s, and he would have at least held his own as a lead singer, and more often as not improved upon what they did. Green River, also produced by Fogerty, and that's John, and recorded at the recently completed Wally Helder Studios in San Francisco, showed Creedence really hitting their stride and making some of the finest American blues rock music of their generation. Gold in the US by the end of 1970. It was certified triple platinum there by 1990. And we have the review in Rolling Stone to vow that the LP demonstrates convincingly that Proud Mary was no fluke. Then Creedence hit their UK stride. So in conclusion, they reached the return to the singles chart no fewer than 4 times in 1970, a tally that included top 10 hits with Travelin' Band and Up Around the Bend. And by September, they were number 1 on the album chart with Cosmo's Factory.
Yes. Thank you so much for being number 1 at that time. Creedence Clearwater. So how did the band's pendulum swing, Mr. Mac?
Recorded over a month, John Fogerty wrote every track on the album and added horns and keyboards to create a more expansive sound on their LP, Pendulum. Among Creedence Clearwater Revival's 7 studio albums, Pendulum is unique, which by definition makes it different from the band's other 6 recordings, but there are differences that help us know that this is a record that's well worth rediscovering. Released in December 1970, it was a second album release of the year. It had been recorded over the course of 5 weeks in the fall. Their previous albums had all been recorded in 10 days or under. Its unique feature is that every song is written by John Fogerty. There's not a cover version to be heard, a prominent feature of all the band's previous records and their final studio album, Mardi Gras. Fogerty songs are strong throughout and are made more interesting by the addition of horns and keyboards, which gives the band's sound much greater depth, a more expansive feel by still remaining signature CCNR recordings. Recorded at Wally Heider Studio in San Francisco, the fact that it took a month to record, a relatively long time for a CCNR record, was down to the fact that the initial take on each song was performed by all 4 members, and this was followed by extensive overdubbing by John. The overdubs included a horn section, keyboards, and additional backing vocals, all of which were played and sung by John. Chameleon is one of the album's outstanding tracks and is a good example of Fogerty's new way of recording. The ballad, Wish I Could Hideaway, is another fabulous track and is very different from traditional CCNR records in that there's very little guitar to be heard. Instead, Fogerty's organ playing very much to the fore. The same thing can be heard of It's Just a Thought. Don't for a second think this is a complete departure from the band, because we love everything about CCNR. Born to Move is a typical Chugolin rock song and has a strong bed of guitars. It's just that it is augmented by a horn section and the organ. That's also true of Hey Tonight, which could have been included in any one of their previous studio albums and not sounded even slightly out of place. The album closes with Rude Awakening number 2, which is an experimental instrumental and vastly different from anything the band had ever previously recorded. The fact is, Fogerty's keyboard playing adds a freshness to the music, making it sound jazz-like in places, but definitely adding greater depth. In conclusion, Pendulum hit the US album chart in December 1970, peaking at number 5. It hit number 8 in the UK, topped the chart in both Norway and Australia, and went top 3 in many other countries.
I wish I can sing the pendulum, Mr. Mate. Congratulations! So, have you ever seen the rain, Mr. Mick?
This may be the album's standout track, and Have You Ever Seen the Rain is as much to do with the fact that Pendulum's one F45 RPM release backed by Hey Tonight. Initially, the band said they wouldn't record and release any singles from this, but this may be their single most great song. So, according to Tom Fogerty, we're trying to change our image. Critics say they're a great singles band, but they can't make albums. According to bass player Stu Cook, so we made an album with lots of singles on it and let them attack that for a while. Released in January 1971, Rain peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, while in Canada it topped the charts and made number 38 in the UK. Many have speculated about the meaning of the song, from it being about the Vietnam War to the lost idealism of the 1960s, while John Fogerty himself says it's about the difficulties within the band and culminated actually in his brother Tom quitting, because there had been some sibling rivalry throughout the time of the band. Another classic, Creedence Clearwater Revival single, started its journey into the public's heart on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, January of 1971. That was the chart that contained the debut of Have You Ever Seen the Rain, released as a 45 from the album Pendulum. It's a song that's only grown in stature as the passing decades burnish the group's remarkable legacy, and it tells its own private but poignant tale of their impending fracture. CCNR had been one of the top names in rock for well over 2 years by the time of the release, with 7 top 10 singles and 7 million sellers to their name and a major international presence. The bloom may have been off the rose by now in terms of frontman and songwriter John Fogerty's feelings toward the band, but the hits kept coming, if not for that much longer. His brother Tom left the band just after the release of Have You Ever Seen the Rain, which duly gave the remaining members an 8th US million single, but there would only be one more, and that was Sweet Hitchhiker. In his autobiography, Fortunate Son, John Fogerty didn't mince words about his frustration at the time he wrote the 1971 hit. Have You Ever Seen the Rain is about the breakup of the band. He confided, I was feeling, man, if we achieved all our dreams and you guys are only talking about negative stuff, by your own volition, you bring in a huge rain cloud and cause it to rain on your own perfect dream. That's the way I saw it. I was watching the band disintegrate right in front of my eyes. Pendulum reached number 5 in the US, its success propelled in no small measure by this new single. Rain jumped onto the US chart with its B-side Hey Tonight also listed at number 56. In the same week as Jackson 5's Mama's Pearl and Dawn's pop tune Knock 3 Times continued at number 1. The Creedence single peaked at number 8 in March and number 36 in the UK. It went gold within a few weeks of its release, and in December 2020, the RIAA increased its certification to a lofty triple platinum. The Cashbox trade review of the single at the time sensed a new direction for Creedence, showing their first major change since establishing themselves on the rock front, wrote the magazine. Creedence Clearwater slows and softens their sound in this single from the Pendulum monster. While Have You Ever Seen the Rain comes as close to a ballad as anything from CCNR, the flip features their unique power to turn this into a two-sided giant. By the summer of 71, the band started its first American tour as a trio, and then in September, their second European itinerary began in Holland. The glory days of CCNR were coming to an end, but Have You Ever Seen the Rain stands as one of their last great songs, as underlined by dozens of cover versions, from Johnny Cash to Joan Jett, Rod Stewart to the Ramones. In any case, the song is Creedence's poignant late-period classic, not to mention its repeat rotation in practically every bar, shop, and playlist across many decades. Happily, Fogerty began to think of the song in a much more positive light in later years. Introducing it to a 2012 show, he said, this song was originally written about a very sad thing that was going on in my life, but I refuse to be sad now, because now this song reminds me of my little girl, Kelsey, and every time I sing it, I think about Kelsey and rainbows. In conclusion, he teamed up with country superstar Alan Jackson to cut a new version for John's all-star Wrote a Song for Everyone album.
Well, very well said, Mr. Mank. So, how did the band end their chart-topping run?
Well, the same genius responsible for Creedence's tremendous popularity, however, contributed to their eventual demise. Tensions arose among the other band members as they vied for a greater say in band directions, which had, till then, been made exclusively by John. An agreement for a more democratic decision-making was reached, but it came too late for Tom Fogerty, his brother, because he had left to pursue a solo career. The remaining members went on to record Mardi Gras and a double album live in Europe. The latter, which contained the top 10 single Sweet Hitchhiker, was the last album they recorded before the band officially disbanded in October 1972. John Fogerty pursued a solo career, although he refused to perform any CCNR hits until 1987, when both Bob Dylan and George Harrison told everyone they would think that Proud Mary was Tina Turner's song, because there also was a hit for Tina, until he did them and he started playing them again. Rockin' All Over the World, which was Status Quo, recorded in 1977, took number 3 in the UK charts, turning it their own anthem, came from John Fogerty's second solo album. Creedence had an astonishing track record, 8 consecutive gold singles: Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, Green River, Down on the Corner, Who'll Stop the Rain, Up Around the Bend, Looking Out My Back Door, Have You Ever Seen the Rain, and 7 consecutive gold albums. Their self-titled debut, Bayou Country, Green River, Willie and the Poor Boys, Cosmo's Factory, Pendulum, and Mardi Gras. In conclusion, there have been more than 100 cover versions of Proud Mary, one of CCNR's most enduring tunes.
Certainly. So, Mr. Mick, how we conclude this episode of Credence Clearwater?
Well, to close out the legacy of CCNR, the preacher that I opened with may have a point of contention about ungodly lyrics. CCNR did record I Put a Spell on You by Screamin' Jay Hawkins, but Hawkins's performance were so over the top, I think they were more parody than sinful. But I'm offended more by the acrimony and poor performances that break up the band. They struggled with record companies and releases and money and a lot of things that plague a lot of bands. And of course, the two brothers who had a falling out, Tom and John, and other band members performed disappointingly. And it's interesting because one of the most disappointing live performances I've ever seen, although I was very excited, I saw the Don Harrison Band at Cerritos College when I was in broadcasting. The band featured former members of CCNR, and I'd likely had too high of expectations, hoping to hear some of the magic of the band since I never saw the original. The Don Harrison Band was a 70s American roots rock band that featured Don Harrison on vocals, guitar, and keyboards, Stu Cook on bass and piano, and Doug Clifford on drums and percussion. Both Cook and Clifford were both members of Creedence Clearwater Revival, and they didn't have quite the sound because they had no John Fogerty. It was like listening to CCNR music, but without the magic and the lyrical genius of Fogerty. After these guys split up, they had also stayed in music for some time and recorded with some other bands. And they did have a bit of a hit, that is the Don Harrison Band. They recorded a cover version of Tennessee Ernie Ford's 1955 hit, 16 Tons. And that album debuted at number 159 and received critical response. They also made the charts with 16 Tons, which peaked at number 47 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. But they just didn't have the charisma and catchy pop rock song sound of CCNR, and they kind of lost its soul. In any case, Rolling Stone ranked CCNR 82nd on the 100 greatest artists of all time. In 2003, Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time included Green River, Cosmo's Factory, and Willie and the Poor Boys. So 3 of their albums made that domination. The following year, the 500 greatest songs of all time list, Rolling Stone included Fortunate Son at number 99, Proud Mary at number 155, Who'll Stop the Rain, 188, and Bad Moon Rising at 355. Fortunate Son was added to the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry list of sound recordings that are culturally, historically, or aesthetically important in 2013. Fortunate Son, Proud Mary, and Cosmo's Factory have all been inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Proud Mary is ranked at number 39 at VH1's 100 Greatest Rock Songs list. Bad Moon Rising is ranked at number 363 on the New Musical Express's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list. In any case, this is Creedence Clearwater Revival, one of the most impressive rock bands of all time, and they are still the timeless story. Creedence Clearwater Revival, from Bayou to Ballad.
Definitely Creedence Clearwater Revival. Thank you so much for your legacy. And thank you so much as one of our legendary icon in the music industry. As Mr. Mick saying, Creedence Clearwater Revival remains as one of the most influential rock bands of all time, leaving behind a legacy of timeless music that continues to resonate with audience across generations. Again, thank you so much for being icon in the music industry. So, Mr. Mick, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, if you wouldn't mind. I am the Idea to Author Coach on Facebook. You can meet me if you want to record and put out a book and also sell it. Also, listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast. And of course, some volumes of my own are available on Amazon. That's Burning America and On Track Ian Hunter.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm inviting you to please do listen to my Food 101 in its fifth season, people, with Chef Alessandro, one of his specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen, Food 101. So, Mr. Mick, another great, great legendary icon in the music industry. Thank you so much
You
for
bet.
your knowledge. So, Mr. Mick, thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Day is full.
More to come, people. See you soon.